So good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. We have Luis Vergara from Piana Consulting on with us, who will be talking about building partnerships and strategic alliances in order to help your organization grow and ensure sustainability for your organization and the services that are being provided. Throughout the COVID pandemic that we've all been experiencing over the past several months, Legacy Foundation, Crown Point Community Foundation, and Foundations of East Chicago have been working together and partnering on how we can best help our communities recover and come back stronger from the challenges that we've been experiencing throughout this pandemic. And as we've been talking to organizations, we've learned that our resources alone can't cover some of the losses that the organizations have suffered, and our grant making alone can't help bring some of the strategic directions that need to come as a result of this. And so as we're looking at how we can help build from this and develop new ways and new approaches of doing things, we've really started looking at how can organizations begin partnering to develop better, more efficient ways of doing things and help to restructure their operations so that there's more collaboration, more partnership, and more working together as we move forward. And so on the phone with us, we have Mary Nielsen from Crown Point Community Foundation. Mary, is there anything that you want to add?
Yes, thanks, Kelly. And I think you said it well. And, you know, this has been an interesting time. We understand it's a very challenging few months that the nonprofit organizations have been experiencing. And it's been interesting with our partnership together with Legacy and the Foundations of East Chicago, because we're doing exactly what this workshop is all about. And we're looking forward to the information that Louis can share with you to just help strengthen your mission. And as we look at new and better ways to help you in the work that you do to support our community. So Kelly, thank you for the introduction and hosting this along with us in the Foundations of East Chicago. And I look forward to Louis's program. Thank you.
All right, and I'll turn it over to you, Louis.
Thank you, and thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Mary, and thank you all for allowing us to kind of come in and speak to you a little bit about, you know, strategic partnerships and collaborations and alliances. You know, just a little bit of context. Luis Vergara has been mentioned. I am a partner with Piana Consulting. I've been in the sector for about 25, going on maybe 30 years almost. Piana, we're a national management firm. We do a little bit of everything. But what we're mostly known for is really nonprofit strategic collaborations. And as you can see this book, it says nonprofit mergers. When we first started doing this work, this is all we were known for was mergers, but we did a lot more collaborations than that. Mergers just was an easy way to sell a book, if you will. Nevertheless, when people ask us kind of our difference makers, that we are the people who literally wrote the book on nonprofit collaboration and mergers. And so we bring a lot of resources to bear in terms of that. So really happy again, you know, to be here and be able to talk to you a little bit about what we're trying to do. In terms of the objectives of today, you know, I really want to be able to, you know, if this was a course in college, this would be the, you know, the 101, and really want to be able to provide you with kind of an understanding of what the different partnership options are. Really hoping to see how you can see this being a process by which you can determine how you become much more mission sustainable. And understand the process a little bit. We're not going to get too much into detail, but at least to kind of give you some early understanding of what a partnership process might look like, and some keys to success. You know, Kelly and Mary already kind of noted why this is important now. It's like you know, we always tell our clients, whether we're doing strategic planning or strategic restructuring, is that they really have to be realistic about their future. And that really is now. You know, we're living in a time that, while there's a lot of things undecided, there's certain decisions that we can make about where we're going and what we're trying to do. I tell people that strategic restructuring or strategic partnerships, it should be a tool just like strategic planning should be for most nonprofits. It should be a way of you thinking critically about how to advance your organization, how to grow it, how to better provide services to your community. And just understanding your options is a really good way to start. You know, you don't have to always pull out and say, let's go partner with so, but just kind of using that as kind of a filter, that it's available to you as a tool is a really important ingredient. And then just kind of having the right tools to allow you to start to do that. And we'll share some of that as we go along. I do want to mention, as we go through this, we're going to be asking you some questions. I really don't want this to be me presenting for the next hour without questions. It is hard to kind of gauge everybody when you're on Zoom, as you all probably well know. So do feel free to use the chat function and put some questions in there. I will try to respond to them as effectively as possible. However, it may not be possible for me to get to all the questions, but I will definitely look to see what we can do. And we will take questions throughout. You know, we'll take questions a little bit in the beginning, but definitely devote some time at the end to answer as many questions as we possibly can. With that said, I do want to start with the question to most of you. And again, feel free to put it into the chat, or even, you know, chime in if you feel inclined to do. How many of you have partnered before with another organization, and thinking about a partnership or alliance, what questions or comments do you have? So it's really two questions. Maybe it's just through a raise of hands or just kind of looking at the screen. You know, how many of you have already done some level of partnership or collaboration? Okay. So a few of you, definitely. And then when you think about partnerships and alliances, what questions come to mind first? Like whether concerns or others, what comes to mind? Is there anybody who has anything that might come to mind? Here, we do have somebody who did a merger. So somebody asked me, are we talking about formal or informal partnerships? Really both. Somebody said partnerships make sense, but managing concerns me, or managing the process totally. All right, so a few questions there. So one of the key things that, you know, just kind of, I'm not going to address those, but I really wanted to see what people's thoughts and concerns were. One of the key aspects, and I think it's great that somebody mentioned managing concerns me. This is a relationship in a lot of ways, and always managing those types of things is difficult. Somebody else said mission alignment. So that's also kind of a key issue in terms of thinking about it. I always say that's where we start first, and we'll talk a little bit about those key components. But definitely welcome your thoughts and questions, and I'll go back to them, like I said, as much as possible. So as we move forward, one of the first things I really want to talk about is, like, we use this word called strategic restructuring. And the reality is that, you know, the three foundations are kind of using the same word. And we were actually the organizations that coined that term, and people go, well, what really is it? It's a little bit convoluted. So what I really like to tell people, yes, we call it strategic restructuring. As I mentioned something earlier today to Kelly, everything's about branding. And strategic restructuring was about branding because people were afraid of the term merger. But what I really tell people, what it really is partnerships. And partnerships are really what strategic restructuring is about. It's really about looking at different ways, both informal and formal. We're going to talk a lot more about formal partnerships today and how to structure those and what those really mean and the differences, and hopefully get to a point where we're really being as clear and concise as possible in terms of what those may look like. So when we think of partnerships, I always tell people what we're really looking for is a way to kind of help organizations grow, develop new ideas, do something better together. I know that sounds kind of cliche, but I really do feel like that's one of the key aspects of it. Thinking of partnerships a little bit like marriage a lot of times, or relationships and dating. Sometimes you might be able to do more with other people than alone. So it's just one of those ways to kind of think about it. The reasons we do this are varied. And in the nonprofit sector, there's a lot. And, you know, these different bubbles that we're showing you right now are really expressing the different types of reasons why people partner. I want to really touch on a few. One is, you know, is definitely about strategic pursuit. A lot of people go, you know, well, why should I do this? It's because maybe you're trying to accomplish something that you've realized you can't go it alone, or you don't have the bandwidth, the expertise, or maybe even the staffing. So that's kind of some of the things that really stand up. I'm going to talk about leadership challenge and board fatigue at the same time. I've been, you know, consulting, like I said, for about 14, 15 years now to the nonprofit sector, and leadership challenges continually pop up. One of the main reasons why an organization, for example, not just partner or do alliances, but for example, merge, would be because they're losing an executive director. And believe it or not, some organizations see being able to replace an executive director much harder than actually merging. And sometimes it's true. Changing of an executive director sometimes for some organizations can take up to a year. Board fatigue is the same thing. When you go through certain processes, some board members, they'll stick around because they really believe in what you're doing, but they also get tired. And that's the reality that we have to really face, is that that's something that happen. It's kind of, shouldn't have to be said, but to serve the community is really one of the key pieces. The other one for me that's really important for organizations is the growth mindset. Is if you're thinking you want to grow and expand, sometimes partnering is the best way to do it. Foundations, a lot of times that when we speak to them, foundations will tell us, you know, we have a lot of nonprofits, they're doing a lot of the same things. We're trying to see which ones can work and collaborate together. And that's really important, is that they see a need for better collaboration, because not everybody's going to be able to sustain themselves at the levels that they're looking at. And then the last one is really specific reasons for each organization. And everything, you know, is relative. A lot of organizations will say, well, we need to do this now. You know, we're trying to figure out why we want to do it. I can tell you right now, there's never been a time where this has been more interesting to a lot of the organizations that we work with. People are really asking us a lot about why this should be happening and what's important. The reality is that the pandemic has really changed this. It's created a dynamic that that a lot of people are not always aware of. We did a survey of, you know, I would say it was over, you know, close to 800 participants, different nonprofits, executive directors and CEOs responded to it. And, you know, most of them, 90% or 91%, stated that they needed to make some changes due to the pandemic. For us, that was really, you know, telling. And a lot of them started having to change how they structured their work. What we're learning right now, we haven't done a survey to follow up, but what we're learning right now, just through more qualitative information we're collecting, is that, you know, people don't feel like they're going to go back to the same thing. There really are changes that are happening. And so because of that, they're really having to undertake certain key issues that they would never have. And of those respondents, and this is, mind you, early May, when a lot of people thought we were coming out of this, about a quarter said that they were considering some type of partnership. I can tell you that that's been amplified just again through qualitative information. And the form of partnerships can really take different types. And we'll talk about those specifically in a few minutes, but I just want to tell you all that, you know, if you're feeling the stress of the pandemic, you're not alone. This is actually something that we're seeing nationally. We're a national firm. We hear about it continuously. I, for example, just got a call from a leader not too long ago, earlier this week, stating that a lot of the folks that they're working with are really exhibiting some level of anxiety about what happens next, and therefore trying to understand partnerships become really critical for them. So why is this a good idea right now? The reality is that change is happening, and partnerships and alliances ultimately are change. And so the fact that you're undergoing some level of change at some degree, going through a little bit more change might be a little bit easier. I know that sounds odd, but you know, sometimes when we start to change, we adapt to change much better. And this is ultimately a change management process, and being able to do that is important. Survival of the fittest is a reality. When we started doing partnerships years ago, a lot of foundations came to us. A lot of different organizations came to us and said, we're worried about how many nonprofits were in existence. Not because they didn't want to support all the missions, but because they just couldn't support everybody who was at the table. So the better positioned you are within the market that you provide services, the better supported and sustained you are, the more likely you are to be able to really survive. And we really do see this as a time when organizations are going to be impacted by this. We're just talking to an arts organization yesterday in San Diego, California, where $600,000 organization had to cease operations because they no longer had the funding, because the city and the county had to curtail funding to them. And that was pretty significant for them. And the final thing is really that partnerships make you stronger. We talk about this quite a bit, but the reality is it does. Whether you're doing some kind of informal collaboration to a merger, it just usually helps you and at least guides you in a certain way. So we want to talk a little bit now about kind of just the different approaches to collaboration. We have something called the collaborative map. I'm really happy to share that beyond just today, and we have that on our website. What we talk about a little bit is that there's really three different types of of partnerships. And one is collaboration, which is the outer ring. And I'm going to speak to these a little bit more in detail. And then there's alliances, which are a little bit more integrated and informal. And then the final ones are strategic restructuring. We really call for onus and change of control to the organization. And by that, I mean, it's that, you're going into a merger and there's a likelihood that an organization will dissolve or that you're setting up a new entity, just various forms. And again, we'll talk about those specifically. Once I'm done talking through these, I'll, stop and pause and see if there's any specific questions that any of you may have. So the first one is collaboration. And I think most of you at some level, at some point, probably have collaborated with another organization. Most of the collaborations that we know are kind of loosely based on, having organizations that want to work together and want to do something collaboratively without really entering kind of contractual agreement. I used to be an executive director, and I used to tell people there's two types of collaboratives that I enjoyed. One was we really put some goals and ideas together, and we really decided we were going to move forward in a certain direction. And the other ones were much looser, where the best things about them were the coffee and the donuts. And I know that sounds kind of like I'm joking, but I think a lot of you have probably been at those meetings where you're like, oh my God, I have to go to this every month, and you really don't get much out of it. So really the one difference that we like to call on when you do collaborations is that we ask for not necessarily formal structures, but formality with them that really ends up with something tangible that everybody can say, I put 25% of this into it, and I got 25% back of what I put into it. A case study that I won't speak to too much is a Learning Schools of the Future for the Hawaii Community Foundation that I did a few years back. And this one really had to do with the fact that, organizations, Hawaii is actually much more rural than I think people would assume it to be. And there's a lot of different small education nonprofits that existed within there. And Hawaii Community Foundation had the idea, like, if we put them together, and everybody's asking us, for example, for monies to do learning, maybe if we did collaborative learning by each of the islands, we'd get much more effective results. And so what they did is they established collaboratives in each island for learning purpose for educators. And it's really become its own kind of system where actually it's now an organization that's statewide, and each island, which happens to be a county, has its own learning community to be able to share, and they come together once a year. So it's just a way of doing collaboration. People opt into it without having to really put forward any of their resources necessarily in terms of thinking about it. So that's kind of a collaboration. And again, it's somewhat of a structure, but usually guided by one principle or without kind of any kind of contractual obligation. Alliances are a bit different. A lot of you are probably familiar with a lot of alliances, whether it be administrative consolidations, fiscal sponsorships, joint programming, or other. And the difference between an alliance and collaboration is that there's much more structure. And by structure, I mean, you sit down and you really create a memorandum of understanding or some type of contractual agreement. For example, if you're doing a fiscal sponsorship, you need some type of contract to stipulate, what the percentage that you're paying into the fiscal sponsor, and so forth. So when people ask me, are they loose? I'd say that none of these are necessarily informal. They're all formal, but as you get through the rings, it becomes even much more formal. And so these are really ones that, you're either as an organization paying into dues, you're for some type of service, paying some type of service through excess capacity, such as I have a development director and I want you to be able to share in that, but I don't need them 50%. So maybe you can use them 50%. We want to develop a joint program. We're each going to put X amount of funds into it, and we're going to manage it in this approach. There's a lot of different things that come into account. Somebody mentioned or asked earlier, they said, one of the things I'm worried about is managing. As we do these, I always tell people collaboration, less management, because it's kind of a group thing. When you're getting into the alliances, somebody usually takes the lead. That's a little bit more common. And so you really have to be clear about not only who's managing it, but how decisions are going to be made. So it's a really good way of kind of thinking about it. I'm going to talk about one and then talk about the case study. Administrative consolidation is probably the most common thing that we do within alliances. And that's actually a little bit of what I already shared, which was organizations who actually, what they work on is developing a back office function, such as maybe they have extra finance capacity, extra development capacity, and they'll create a contract with another organization to provide those services. And it's really becoming common. The one that most people are aware of is joint programming. And we did one here in California for federally qualified health centers, so local community health centers who who thought it really important to connect with domestic violence programs, because a lot of times the health centers would find somebody who were going through some kind of domestic violence, but they didn't want to just refer them out, or the people would stop there and not go further. This program, what it did is what allowed domestic violence programs to have desks within the healthcare system in order for not only for them to be able to say, here, let me refer you to somebody, but how to actually have somebody on site to be able to deliver that service. So it really worked out for both, because what had happened is it filled the gap that wasn't, that otherwise would have continued to exist. The last one I want to talk about is just strategic restructuring. When we talk about partnerships, most people either go to merger or they're afraid of the word merger. And we, for example, when we work with our clients, we don't have a predisposed notion of where they're going to go. We say, what do you want to do? And there's a form or structure that allow you to get there. And merger sometimes is the final one that people look to. And mergers are pretty common. I'm currently working on one with an organization called Health Partners in School and Digital Kids. Really opportune time for them to come together. Health Partners offers sex education within the school districts. Digital Kids offers online bullying. Both of them are connected. They thought it was a great opportunity to come together and provide additional services for their organizations. This has actually become even more opportune now, because even though they started pre-COVID, the fact that Digital Kids has an online platform is going to allow them to continue to provide services in a much more effective manner. So it really is a great way to kind of think about it. But there's other kind of things beyond mergers. There's parent subsidiaries, which are structures that allow you to continue to maintain some level of independence. And then there's also joint venture corporations, including MSOs, management service organizations, which are some of the most common. A management service organization is a third-party entity who provides back office functions for organizations as well. So it's kind of really common. It's kind of like you establish a third party who, as a potential profit motive, who can actually provide the back office functions that you can't. So maybe you're not large enough to have development, finance, and HR. These are organizations that can do that for you. And nonprofits tend to set it up as a third party organization. Nonprofit still, but third party. So I know I've given you a lot of information just about the continuum of the types. And just so you all know, while we say these names, fiscal sponsorship, collaborative learning, associations, parent subsidiaries, mergers, really there's any form, you decide what you want to do. That's the most important thing. What is it that you need? And there's usually a form for it. The main thing is that the closer you get to the yellow circle, the more integration there is involved in terms of it. So I want to pause right now, and I know I've been speaking a lot, and see if there's any questions. Feel free to either go through the chat function or come off mute and let me know if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about so far. And maybe even a little bit about answering some of these questions if it's opportune.
So we have a few questions in the chat. So if we can go through a couple of those now, and just let me know if you plan on getting to those later in the presentation.
Sure, let me try to pull those down, unless you have them available,
I
Kelly?
have them up, so I
Sure.
can just go through them. So the first one is, how do you communicate the need for an alliance with people who feel they only want to be loyal to you?
Interesting. And I think, the question, the way it sounds like to me is like definitely that, it's very specific to one organization versus working with others. And I think, again, one of the things that we start with is we actually tell organizations, when you're working in alliance, stop thinking about, think less about the organization. And I know that sounds difficult. Think more about the mission and the community. Think about what you're trying to offer. So if you think about, what are we focused on? We're focused on, if we're focused on young people, for example, and providing after school services, just as an example, think about the mission attainment of that and what you're able to do together. And remember that, for example, with an alliance versus a merger, your identity is not going to change. It's really what you're able to provide. Are you able to sustain and advance your mission? I hate to be harsh with people, but I tell them, if an alliance, for example, is the difference between you staying in business and not, then you should do it, because ultimately mission sustainability is much better than being out of business and not providing services. So that's really a difficult way to look at it. But in general, I think you just need to communicate with people the advantages that you're going to get out of a partnership.
Great.
I have a question. One of the challenges is that You know, when you're working jointly with other organizations, you know, I think everybody can agree every organization ought to receive accolades for what they're contributing to the partnership. But oftentimes, you know, the way the organizations market themselves differently. You know, they may promote themselves as running this particular program and not mention that they're partnering with these other organizations in order to get this work done. How have you seen the marketing, the joint marketing work with some of these collaborations where everybody receives, you know, the credit for the sacrifices and the work that they make with their organizations?
Great question, Kevin. And in a bit, we're going to get into getting specific around some of the, you know, just implementation pieces. But to answer your question in brief right now, you know, one of the key components of it is this is why, you know, we're going to get into what it takes to create a partnership. And when you're developing a partnership, that's the key thing. You know, when I said, yeah, you want it, like, for example, with an alliance or a joint program, you want to go, well, okay, so how's the program work? One of the things that people fail to go, it's like, well, how are we going to communicate and how we're going to market it? Those pieces, as simplistic as they may sound, you need to anticipate them and put them into a memorandum of understanding. And again, the memorandum of understanding, for example, if it's not looked at by an attorney, and I'll talk about this in a bit as well, might not be legally binding, but it kind of implies that you're in this together and that you've kind of signed an agreement, you know, a formal agreement, if you will, amongst organizations. Goodwill really, you know, presides. And you want to say, okay, you know what, how we're going to do this is that, you know, Kevin's organization is going to take the lead on marketing this. And anytime he puts out any information regarding the joint partnership, all 3 logos need to be on it. And here's the wording that we need to do. So what it is, it's actually anticipating it. So not allowing it to get to that point. So you don't have to really worry about the coordination. You know, it is a really difficult thing, but it is about anticipating, because what you do once, if it gets too far down the line, you're just not gonna be able to pull it back as effectively. So, but we'll talk about some more of that in a bit as well, Kevin.
Okay, and one more question is,
Sure.
we are a small nonprofit. What is the best way to reach out to a larger nonprofit and start a conversation about merging or going under their umbrella?
Awesome question. And let's hold that one, because I'm going to speak to that a little bit more in the next section, but I'll definitely address that. And if I don't, let's come back to it for sure.
Okay, great.
Great. All right. Thank you. So I'm going to kind of walk you through a little bit of the partnership process. This to me is really kind of one of those critical pieces of, like, I'm not going to tell you every single detail because we'd be here for, you know, hours, but I definitely want to be able to speak to a little bit about, like, how we envision the process. Like I said, we developed this process, and a lot of people who do this work have adopted it. So if you work with a local consultant, you might actually see a lot of the same practices in terms of doing this. The partnership process to us really takes into account 3 pieces. An assessment piece where you assess your partner, yourself and your partner, in terms of, you know, one, yourself, you're assessing what do you need a partnership for. Your partner, you're determining how you could best work with them. You resolve to move into a negotiation or planning stage. And that negotiation planning stage is kind of like how I answered Kevin's question a little bit about, like, you know, that's where you start thinking, like, how are we going to market this program? You know, you start talking about that, and having a negotiation is less of a corporate style negotiation about, like, oh, well, I'm going to take this and you're going to take that. It's more like, how are we going to share in resources, and how are we going to put this out and make sure that everybody has an equal percentage? Once you've kind of negotiated the terms, then you get into an agreement process where you agree on what it's going to look like, and you begin to implement. Sometimes that takes legal resolution, which we'll talk about a little bit. And then there's an integration, and integration really is putting all the pieces together. I'm gonna kind of joke around, but I use an analogy around marriage quite a bit when I'm talking to these folks, not because of any other reason than because I actually like the analogy. But I tell people assessments like dating, negotiations like planning the wedding, and then implementations like getting married and moving forward. And if you know anything about being married, implementation is really where all the hard work starts. So we'll talk a little bit about that and kind of how that kind of plays out. So a little bit about the specific about the assessment process. In the self-assessment, there's a lot of questions we can ask. What I'm looking for most likely with folks is, like, do they understand, or are they clear why they want to do this? And what is it that they're bringing to the table? It's really good to understand your assets, your competitive advantage, your unique value to the community, because you become a better partner. You're better able to tell your other partners, look, this is what I want to do, and this is why I'm doing it. You move from a self-assessment to identifying potential partners. We do this through a variety of forms. One is that you can just create, a simple tool that'll kind of guide you and say, this is the criteria of what we're looking for a partner, and start looking for it. And you identify them through local connections and so forth. And I'll dive into this a little bit in the next slide. And as you do, you kind of maybe say, there's 10 potential partners we have, but 3 are really viable for us. Let's move forward and start having conversations with those folks. And then together you assess the potential viability of partners. You go, how compatible are we? Are we mission aligned? Do we have the same goals for our community? Do you have assets that I don't have? So you start really forging ahead in terms of thinking about how that partnership may take place and how it looks. Because I want to jump really into this question about how to approach a potential partner. To me, this is one of the most interesting questions, and I'm not going to go by it point per point, but instead talk to you a little bit about how I usually coach clients go around it. First, once you figure out what you want to do and you've identified some potential partners, I think there's a couple of things. There was a question about identifying, we might want to be, we might want to merge, or we might want to see how we can look at being acquired by another organization. A good first place I always tell people is reach out to people and ask them, if they have time for a call or coffee. If this was a different situation and we were all sitting together in some room at one of the foundations, what I would usually tell you right now is look around the room, see who's here, see if anybody feels like they'd be a viable partner for you and why. A lot of times it's people we collaborate with already and we have good relationships with and we trust, and we go, you know what, they do similar things to us, and I think it'd be great to be able to speak to them. And so that really represents a good way of doing it. I also tell people when you first reach out, kind of specifically talking to that question, it's a larger organization, you might want to reach out to them, and maybe a good way is just to say, I'm interested in developing partnerships for this reason. Do you know of anybody? This again, kind of like the dating analogy. You might really like somebody, but instead of asking them or being forward, you might just kind of work your way around it and go, hey, do you know anybody who might be able to do this? A lot of times asking for advice leads to that, and that's a really good way to be able to do it. And so you start developing that organization organically. Or if you know another partner, just be upfront and say, we're really looking at partner. Would you be interested? But it usually is best if it's done one-to-one, either an executive director or a board member. Board members who know each other, or executive directors who might know each other. And then as your partners, this is your opportunity to date around, look at other partners and kind of say, what do they bring to the table? Because once you develop a stronger relationship, you don't want that. You don't want to be looking at different partners. You want to go, we've honed in on so-and-so, and I think that's who we should pursue. And, that's just kind of, being respectful to the other organizations and so forth. So just a way of thinking about it. So hopefully that addresses the question a little bit, but it is a really important one. But first, identify who you want, set up some coffee, and then look at your options. So once you have a potential partner in place, you get into that negotiation process. We call it a negotiation, but it really is a planning process. It's thinking about what it is you're trying to set up and planning for it. The more integrated you are going to be, the more you're going to have to negotiate. I always say, as you get green and blue, the most important are probably program and governance that you're going to negotiate. And what does a program look like? How are we going to govern this program? How's the leadership of it going to take place? Those are the key things. Human resources probably comes in as well. As Kevin had asked the question, communications become extremely important. Within the Blue Alliance, you might go, we want to share an office to deliver our programs of it, being very specific about what that means if you have to pay into it. Just different pieces that you'll have to negotiate. And then due diligence is what we call financial and legal. The financial piece might be, just seeing if these people actually have the resources to do what they said they do. And legal could be really, different depending on the level of structure. If you're doing a collaboration, you might want to do an MOU together, and that's it. If you're doing a joint program or a fiscal sponsorship within the alliance, you might want an MOU that's actually reviewed by an attorney. They may not make changes; they just want to review it. if you're going to merge, you're definitely going to have to get legal attorneys and legal entities involved to be able to file and do other kind of pieces to that piece. So varying pieces involved here. The next piece that you move on to is the implementation. With implementation, there's a few things that take place. The first thing is additional planning. Just because you've agreed, it doesn't mean that everything's done. You start planning for, maybe it's you've been planning at a management level. Now you need to get some staff together to keep planning. The legal resolution happens during this time as well, where you really want to go, okay, well, it's a merger. We need to file with the state and get some of the legal components in order. And then integration is the ongoing factor of, developing systems, working with organizations to kind of come together and really trying to figure out an effective way to make sure that it's implementing correctly. I tell people integration of partnerships, that are not mergers can take anywhere between a month and 6 months. Integration for a merger can take up to 2 years. So that's actually after you start kind of working together, that it usually takes that time. And then just, a little bit of cost and timeline of doing those things. Usually there's 3 types of costs: facilitation, due diligence, and deal making. To me, that's the consultant fees that you might ask somebody to do, especially if it's more integrated. The legal execution of the deal could take place if you need that. And then integration of peoples and systems. The timeline, just to negotiate something, it'll take 2 to 4 months, but it depends on the level of partnership. You can move quickly if parties are flexible, but it really does take people's time and effort. When people go, what's the most time people spend on it? It's developing partnerships. It really does take time. And other elements of partnerships can take up to a year. If you're doing a merger, usually a safe timeline to execute the full merger, not agreeing to the merger, but executing can take up to a year. So just kind of perspectives to look at. The other ones won't take as much, but those are just kind of a way to kind of consider. The reason we also bring up facilitation due diligence, what we found from our clients when we've gone back to them and asked them what worked, they said having a consultant and having somebody to guide the process is really an effective way of doing this. And that's the reality that we find it. We're glad to be in the business, and we don't just say it because we are in the business, but the reality is it does take some effort. So again, I know I've gone through a lot, and for me, I think as most of you are here probably because you've considered some type of partnership. I want to see, where do you feel like most support's needed? What do you feel like there's questions about in the process? If you are thinking of doing this, what in terms of moving forward with this? And again, feel free to put in the chat or ask directly. Any questions?
If I can interject,
Please.
for a merger in 2016, a successful merger, and we went through a failed merger in 2012. Each time we had a facilitator, someone's objective, and it was very, very helpful to have an outside person kind of mediate, kind of guide the discussion and facilitate the whole process. So yeah, definitely having an outside facilitator is an asset.
Great. Yeah, no, and I appreciate you saying that. A big piece of it is that facilitator should also be, as you mentioned, somebody who doesn't have a vested interest in the outcome. Their interest should be in getting you to a decision, not necessarily, oh, I like so-and-so better than the other organization. No, it should be like they're basically impartial and working towards an outcome. And that's one of the first things I tell clients, that's what we're trying to do. So it's really important. Thank you for that. I think there was a question in the chat, so let me pull that down. So the question is, would you suggest avoiding partnerships with organizations that do the same work as your nonprofit and focus more on partnerships with organizations that do different work? The reality is it could be either or. A lot of times 2 organizations coming together from the same type of organization work as effectively as not. I did 1 year I did in Arizona, 2 organizations that provided protective services to youth, varying protective services. Both organizations were really large, around, relatively large, around 6-7 million each. And what they did is they were serving, I would say about half of Arizona. And through the merger, they decided if we come together, we can actually expand our services, because if you know anything about Arizona, it becomes very rural after you get out of the big cities. And they just thought we can actually together could probably provide services to the whole state. And so those are it. I think when they provide different services, also advantageous, especially if they connect. And that's the main thing. You want them to be able to connect in some way, whether you're serving the same clientele, or you can, expand. There's organizations who go, we only serve youth, but we want to be able to serve, everybody from 0 to 100, and so they'll do that. So just a way of thinking about it as well. All right, if there's no other questions, I'll move forward. Okay, and we can ask some questions at the end as well. Just kind of a few last things that I want to be able to just speak to you about. We've spoken throughout this presentation a little bit about success factors. And to me, mission focus and alignment is probably the most important. And when we think about that, I'm not saying that the missions have to be exactly the same, but you should be working towards common goals, or at least feel like the missions don't get in the way. And that's why we say flexibility in pursuing your mission. It's also a matter of like, there's organizations who will say, we specifically serve, seniors only from 65 and above, and if somebody goes, well, our mission is to serve elderly adults, anybody from 50 and over, that doesn't make you kind of contrary. It just makes you, can you be flexible and allowing for more to happen? So that's one of the things that to really happen. I want to speak a little bit to understanding the moment as well, which is right now we're in a crisis factor as a sector. And I think it's really important to understand that we might be this way for a while, but don't let that be the only reason why you get into it. Make sure that you have a really clear understanding of what you're trying to do. And while there's a crisis here, sooner or later, you're going to get out of it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is don't give up the farm while you're trying to do this, because there's still opportunities for you to succeed. But do look at partnerships as a clear way of maybe getting a little bit ahead with your mission. A lack of divisiveness is really important. I look at that in two ways. One is there's always people who want to do this for their own internal reasons. Really make sure it's mutually beneficial if you're going to do this. And make sure that people are just not doing this for their own, because they really want something. I think positive relationships with the partners are really important. I always tell people, don't discount the fact that if you like them or not. Again, kind of equate it to relationships. You don't want to date somebody you don't like, or maybe you do, but that's your own thing. But I would say try to keep within that spectrum of like, I'd like to work with these people, because that's what it's going to end up being, is a working relationship. And then finally, I'll just kind of re-mention clarity regarding the desired outcomes you want. If you're not clear on why you're doing the partnerships, it's probably not a good partnership for you. Really have a really good understanding. And when you start working with a partner, really have a good understanding of why you might be doing it. The other thing for us is really about making the case. We feel like the first thing you need to do if you're going to partner, the more integrated you get, is that you need to get your board and staff aligned, and you really got to make sure that they understand. Communicating to staff, sometimes if you're doing a merger, for example, you might want to wait. But if it's a joint program, you want to get them on board, understand what they're doing, let your board know what you're doing and where you're at as well. That's really important. And as you move through the process, get your supporters and funders aligned as well. And that's really important too, because you'd be surprised, and I don't think you're surprised, because you have organizations who are actually really promoting this, and having Kelly and Mary here kind of are indicative of that. When we work, a lot of folks are fearful of telling their funders, oh, we're thinking about a partnership. Don't be, because they more likely will support it, because really this is a good way of thinking strategically about what's coming ahead for you. It's, again, entering into a partnership process is not necessarily going to result in a partnership, but going through it is as valuable as possible. Now, if it ends up in a partnership, it'll be better for you, but it's definitely not one of the things. So getting these people aligned, letting them know as during different intervals where you're at is really important. So I want to be able to spend some time, last 10, 12 minutes taking questions, but just to summarize kind of just things to think about here, again, think about what you want, because there's various forms of partnership that'll meet your needs. It's all about advancing your mission. So if you want something, there's a structure that'll take form. Partnerships should take time and capacity. So as you're going through this, don't discount the fact that you should spend some time early on. So questions such as the one, I keep on going back to Kevin's question because I thought it was great about like marketing. It could easily be swept under the rug, but the more you think about those things in advance, it'll take a little bit more time to plan out, but the better it is. As I mentioned earlier, don't discount liking your partner. having some kind of alignment with them and cohesiveness is really important. A strong process will provide confidence and structure. So by that, what we're really saying is you can do this on your own, but really think about using tools or even a consultant if you can to help guide the process along. It'll really be helpful. And then again, clarity of purpose. Understand why you're doing this. Again, using that analogy of marriage, you don't just want to get married because you think marriage is great. You want to make sure that you're getting married and partnering with somebody because it's actually a good outcome for you. So really important. So like I said, I really want to leave enough time to address questions, talk. I'm going to actually put a pause to the presentation so we can maybe see each other and have a little bit of a discussion, in terms of that. So bear with me as I get out of there. There we go. So yeah, so definitely want to be able to see if there's any questions. Feel free to put them in the comments as well, and I'll try to address those. But any questions, comments, thoughts, suggestions?
We do have one more question here.
Sure.
What are your thoughts about nonprofits and for-profits merging?
Good question. In recent years, I've had that a little bit more. One, the first thing that comes to mind is like, is there a mission orientation? Depending on the state, and I don't have all the laws in terms of incorporation for Indiana, for example. I think you have to think about how it's viewed by the state. I'll tell you one thing, it's a lot easier to merge the for-profit into the nonprofit. So hopefully that's the way it's happening. Otherwise, it kind of becomes a little bit more difficult to do. It doesn't mean you can't do it, but it becomes more difficult. Now, again, you have to just kind of think about what the regulations are, the type of organization it is, and just think about the overall intake. But it's becoming more common. I wish I could tell you that I have much more examples to give, but the one I can tell you is we had an organization that we recently worked with where there were actually clinics. One was for-profit, the other nonprofit. The most difficult piece of it was that the for-profit actually owned the structure where their clinics were, and the nonprofit couldn't buy it. So it became an issue of how to create a plan to pay off the loan to the owners of the company. So just an example of issues that arise. Other questions, comments? Everybody's ready to go partner? How many people have concerns, major concerns about partnering? Minor concerns? Wendy, Sue, I think. What are do you have, are there specific things that come to mind for y'all? And feel free to get off, yep.
Well, I do have another question.
Sure.
On the financial side, when you're looking to merge with another nonprofit, how important is it for you to bring, a good cash flow to the agreement? Is that something that a lot of organizations want to see? Or I know there's different types of mergers, but I don't know, if your finances impact the merger in any way.
So again, not an easy answer, but let me try to give you a couple scenarios to really think through. So one is that a lot of times when we're looking at organizations that are going to partner, one is in difficult financial situations, so they're not bringing anything to the table. Mm-hmm. The idea is that you're bringing that your assets, programmatic assets, organizational assets are in tune, and that let's say you don't have a lot of money, but you have something to offer. And when I say looking at yourself from an assessment standpoint, if you don't have that financial piece, think about what's the assets you're bringing to the table, because ultimately, when the state is approving an asset and liability transfer for a nonprofit, they actually don't care. Mm-hmm. That's going to sound weird, but they don't care about the finances. They care about the mission. Can the other organization sustain the mission of organization A? Now, if you bring a great cash flow, perfect. But unlike in corporate mergers, one of the things that happens in for-profit mergers, corporate for-profit mergers, is that you have to, a lot of organizations go, we'll acquire you, but we want you to pay off your debt. That's not necessary for the nonprofits. They're going to take the liabilities and the assets. So that's a way to get ahead of it if you think, but no, it really depends on the other organization. If they're just getting you for financial purposes, I would almost look at why is that the case? So just kind of a thought process. Wendy, I know you actually had other comment. Hopefully I addressed that, Sue.
You did, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah,
I haven't taken into
If I could just say something.
Wendy was in the middle of a sentence. We just couldn't hear her too well.
Just
Kevin.
1 second, Kevin.
Okay.
Wendy, if you can speak a little louder.
I guess so.
Oh, there you go.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So, yeah, I haven't, it's not merging with another organization. Not
We
hearing me?
lost you again.
I'm not sure what's happening.
Go ahead. Let's see if I can, I'll see if I
Okay.
can hear. I can hear you a little bit. Go ahead.
Okay. So it's more about partnerships and collaborations, which I've done before. They don't always work. And the biggest difficulty I've experienced is even if you have an MOU and you've identified who's responsible for what, maybe partners don't always come through with what they're supposed to come, and then you're left hanging.
Right.
So those are just, I guess, some of the things that can happen.
Yeah.
And that concern me.
There's two things that I've done because that happens to everybody. We've all been part of collaboratives that somebody doesn't pull their weight, if you will, in terms of thinking about it. Two things that I actually recommend for organizations. One is do a time constraint MOU where you say we're going to check in every 3 months, and that you, in order to stay within the collaborative or the partnership, you have to be at that table at that 3-month period. And I know that sounds kind of, oh, well, that feels like extra work, but that's kind of what you're trying to get is ensure buy-in to be able to do that. The other thing is that I've done, and this is going to sound a little bit like, well, why? While the board doesn't have to approve a partnership unless it's a merger, have the board pass a resolution that you're working with somebody else. There's a sense of accountability there that sounds kind of odd, but it is very specific, and it has to do with like, we're going to have some, governance kind of control over it. It's not 100% effective, but it is about keeping people accountable, and that's really what it comes down to. That's where I think that's what happens with most collaborations and alliances that don't work. There's a lack of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard for you to say, if you're not at the table, or, we've done things like you missed 3 meetings, you're out of the partnership. I know that sounds harsh, but sometimes that's the only way to kind of keep it moving. So I hope that helps a little bit, Wendy.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Kevin, you had a,
sorry to,
Yeah, if I could just comment a little bit on what Wendy's earlier question about corporate or for-profit partnerships. I know one of the challenges that the Salvation Army is facing right now is, we've had long-standing partnerships with for-profit companies, and COVID-19 has changed a lot of things, and we've suddenly had corporate partners that have been with us for years who have really been responsible for much of our fundraising that we do, who now want to change the game, and so I think that's with a lot of nonprofits, small and large. That's going to be something that you'll always be concerned of. If you're dependent on some for-profit businesses for your fundraising, whether it's COVID-19 or some other challenge, they may decide, because their interest is making a profit, they may decide to change things, and then of course you're left looking for other ways to raise that money needed to run your programs.
yeah, and that's definitely those types of partnerships. I think with the mergers, you're looking at different structures, and that really changes it as well. So you got to just understand the intent, and I don't know what way this is going. So I do want to be mindful of time. We have a few minutes, but just so y'all know, I know Kelly and potentially Mary want to close out, but I'm also happy to stay on a little bit longer to answer any questions if anybody has anything pressing. I fortunately don't have anything to run to, but so I can stick around for a little bit if anybody has specific questions.
yeah, so I wanted to also mention that through our partnership with Crown Point Community Foundation and Foundations of East Chicago, we have over the past, how many months has it been since March? 5, 6 months now, been offering COVID response grants. And so during the first phase, we were really focused on the emergent needs of the communities. And now in phase 2, we've been offering grants for nonprofit capacity building. And part of that capacity building is looking at the organization's emergency preparedness and strategic restructuring. And so the next deadline for that grant is coming up on September 10th. And that's to apply. These are grants of up to $5,000 to either help your organization implement an emergency preparedness plan or to engage in strategic restructuring activities. And so that could be through the hiring of a consultant, to if there's activities that need to be undergone, if there's rebranding that needs to happen, if there's shared office space that you're looking to purchase. So things like that, that would be costs that would result from strategic restructuring. And so we do have, like I said, September 10th is our next deadline. We know that's pretty soon, since some of you maybe are just in the thinking about this phase now. So we have added an additional deadline, which will be October 31st, I believe, 30th or 31st, whatever the last day of October is. So we are adding a final deadline for that grant. And so if you're interested, you can find the application on our website. And I also do want to let you know that La Piana Consulting offers a strategic restructuring assessment tool where they would help work with you. And if you have an organization that you're actually courting or talking with, and maybe you're interested in exploring that, they have a tool that they could work with you on and kind of start you on the path down that process. And that would be an eligible activity to apply for under our grant that we're offering, is to help cover the cost of the Strategic Restructuring Assessment Tool, SRAT. And so, Luis, do you have anything that you want to add about that?
Yeah, no, the only thing is, you can do, it's something that we can help you set up. You can do it, you can self-administer, and then we can come in at the back end and just help you consider how to move it forward in terms of just thinking about, like, okay, well, here's based on your answers, here's some of the things to think about and where you're at. It's a really good tool that if you have some, for example, board members or staff who are unsure about partnering, it's a really good tool to bring them along with, because it just makes you have a strategic conversation with them about what it might look like.
And you're not required to use La Piana Consulting. So if there's another, consultant or firm that you've worked with, you are of course welcome to go with anybody that you want. But I have done a bit of research on this and found La Piana comes very highly regarded nationally and has worked with a number of foundations and nonprofits.
Well, thank you, Kelly, and everybody for participating. Like I said, if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out directly to me if you'd like. Our website also has a lot of information. And like I said, if anybody has a pertaining question, ask me to hang on, and I'm willing to answer a few questions as we end.
I'd like to just add, thank you to everybody for joining us today as well. A lot of great information from Louis today, and I think one of the things we could send out is just a little more information on the services that Kelly mentioned that are provided that you might be interested in from La Piana as well. And one of the most important things that I heard multiple times that Louis said throughout this workshop is, focus on the mission, and that is key, and that's something that we as a foundation and Legacy in East Chicago, as well as, and the reason that we have partnered together through this whole COVID is we're focusing on what our mission is. And this is something bigger than all of us independently, and we're stronger together. And sometimes even just perhaps dusting off that strategic plan that you might have and looking at what are some of those key initiatives that you and your board are really focusing on, and who could you potentially partner with to help just elevate that project or program, which just advances your mission. So I think that's something, and I'll refer to Louis real quick on that, but just really looking within your own strategic plan to look at how can you advance your mission by partnering or collaborating or having alliance, to just move that forward at a more rapid pace.
Right. And great thought to kind of end on it. Yeah. If you have a bunch of goals and goal 3 was, you know, we were going to develop program X and you haven't done program X, maybe somebody's already doing it or halfway to do it. So maybe you can partner with them and kind of consider how you might be able to develop it. It's always one of those good things to make sure that you're staying within line of what you're trying to do. So perfect.
All right.
All right.
Well, thank you. I will stop the recording now.